Ich lese den Bericht von Anne Weir, geboren am 1.6.1928. 1945 war sie 17 Jahre alt, so wie ich heute. On VE Day, Victory Europe Day, the 5th of May, Anne, having her first real experience of farm work on a farm just south of Guildford, was given the day off. She got on her bicycle and cycled the 20 miles back home to Kingston on Thames. Once there, she found Tony setting up his crystal radio. Anne joined him, and they lay across the bed with the headphone divided between them and listened to the radio, which was reporting blow by blow all the excitement of the celebrating crowds, and they were wishing they could join them. After VE night on the 5th of May, a day of great rejoicing, the Londoners would now be able to go back to their own beds without the fear of bombs landing. Many of them had been sleeping in the deep underground railway stations. Big bonfires were lit. The crowd was huge, maybe 1 million. It was dangerous to be in the middle. You could easily be squeezed between mounted police pushing the crowds and the pushing back of seething crowds. Crowds had gathered by the docking ships, bringing back soldiers who had been in prison camps. They were looking and hoping they would see their husband or sons. In the villages and towns, the people gathered in the streets and laid out tables of food for the children, sandwiches and jelly and mugs of milk in heavy white mugs. The Prime Minister Winston Churchill appeared on the balcony of the Ministry of Health building in central London and gave an impromptu speech. Huge cheering crowds gathered below, and he declared, "This is your victory." The crowd shouted back, "No, it's yours." Anne remembers VG, Victory Japan Day, on the 15th of August 1945, end of World War II. VG night was very similar, except Winston Churchill came out on the balcony of Buckingham Palace to be with the King and Queen after the crowds had first seen royalty waving to the crowd. At that time, Anne, 17 years old, and Tony were staying on a farm in Sussex. On the 15th of August, Anne, with her brother Tony and cousin John, went up to London by train to join the celebrations. They were very excited, wondering what they would find. All people were happy, delighted that the war was finally over and the men would come back to their families. VG night was after the election, and on the 15th of August it was Clement Attlee who was the new Labour Prime Minister. It was he who waved to the crowds, which pleased them. A woman in the crowd began calling out, "We want Winnie," meaning Churchill. The crowds, mostly Labour voters, turned on her like a giant ugly beast. The King and Queen and their daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, came out onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace, and the crowds broke out in a huge roar of delighted cheering. After the royal group had gone back inside, outside Buckingham Palace, people were joining a long snake of people hanging onto each other and singing the London version of Knees Up, Mother Brown. People and soldiers were setting off thunder flashes belonging to the Ministry of War, which banged around the bystanders' feet and made them skip back. Young men were in the parks searching for benches and anything else that would burn and making huge bonfires in the streets around Buckingham Palace. American soldiers with brightly painted prostitutes on their arms came dancing by, obviously full of drink. There was no train back to Grinstead, so the three stayed in Green Park overnight alongside Buckingham Palace, among many other families up from the country, and they caught the milk train, the first train in the morning which traditionally collected the milk brought to the station by farmers and taken back to London. This was on VG Day. Nell Cook, John's mother and the farmer's wife, had spent an anxious night worrying what had become of her son and Tony and Anne. In her relief, she sent them out into a field of mangold which needed weeding. So the three spent the morning pulling fat hen which had overgrown the crop. How glad those three were to flop into bed.